Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jack Teal from the team here at Mayday. So, thank you all on my behalf, but also on behalf of the broader team for joining us. And thank you for being a Mayday customer, of course. Today's session is all about going deep on one of our most powerful products, Recharger. So, it's the perfect session if you're already familiar with the basics of Mayday, you know how to get around, you know how to use it, and you probably already know the basics of our Recharger product as well. If you're not there yet, we do have a different training, which is our Basics 101, which will cover everything from logging in to building basic expense recharge rules. So if you haven't checked that out or you're not feeling confident with a lot of stuff, then perhaps that's a good place to start. But yeah, if you kind of know the basics, then you're in the right place to take your learning of Mayday to the next level. In terms of housekeeping, as is the case with every training session that we run, the Q&A is open throughout the session. So if you would like to throw a question my way, you're absolutely welcome to do that. But yeah, beyond that, I will just get started. So in terms of the agenda, we want to look at some of the more advanced recharge use cases. So we're going to cover everything around, recharging from revenue and balance sheet codes, because in our basics training, we cover just expense related recharges. We'll talk through how to create management fees as well. So maybe you've got certain charges that you want to push through the group from one entity to others, but they aren't based on costs. Or maybe these are predetermined amounts at the beginning of a year and you want to charge them out equally month on month. Whatever the case may be, I'll show you how to do that. We'll also then talk through intra-entity reallocations. So you might not be familiar with the term intra-entity, but basically we're talking about reallocating stuff within a zero file. So maybe every time a transaction hits the legal expenses code, you don't want to have to manually split that out into 3 lines and allocate it to 3 different tracking categories. So you could build a rule in Mayday that says anytime something hits that account code, split it out 3 ways and allocate it to these tracking categories. But you don't need to move it out to a different zero file. We're happy to keep it inside the same zero file. Number 4 on the list there is recharging complex costs like wages. So wage recharges are some of the more, detailed and complex recharges that have to happen. Oftentimes we're dealing with not a lot of information in Xero. So there is a middleman here, but you can absolutely use Mayday to recharge really complicated and detailed wage recharges across the group. On that note, around some more complex stuff, we'll also be looking at custom periods. So, for some recharges, we don't want to do things monthly. You may need to do weekly recharges if you're a certain kind of business. So you can do that, or even quarterly recharges if you don't need to do them frequently. And second order recharges too. So I just had to look at my notes to remind myself. But basically, there are scenarios where you might want to recharge something from A to B and then from B to C. And you can do that in Mayday as well. The final thing on the agenda is then going to be to cover off how to update recharges after posting. What does that look like? So yeah, without further ado, I might dig into it and I'll come back to this slide when it's time to go into live Q&A. If there are questions, that is. So let me share Mayday and pull this up on screen. So there you go. Here's the product. Hopefully you're all familiar with this, and obviously you're all familiar with Recharger. So something I want to touch on, just as a very quick note, expanding on simple expense recharges, is one of the more common questions we get is, okay, great, I understand how to process an expense recharge. I come into Mayday, I choose the entity and I create a rule. Maybe I want to recharge my, legal expenses. Great, nice and easy. We begin that process. But sometimes we don't want to offset the expense when we post these entries. We would like to keep the expense grossed up and we would like to have a revenue amount offsetting it. And you can do that. So what you have to change up the top here is at cost to cost plus. This is where you can choose a markup. So if you are marking your recharges up, this is where you would do that. But if you just want to offset equally, you don't need a markup. You can just set that to 0. And that then adds this step here, which is going to allow you to choose a revenue code. So where traditionally we run an expense recharge and Mayday posts it and the expense gets reduced in the P&L, in this case, the expense would stay and you're going to get a credit to this other revenue account or whatever revenue account you select. So I just wanted to cover that off very quickly because it is kind of an extra detail to some of those more simple expense related recharges. Now moving across here to revenue related recharges. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this because the nature of these is basically the same as expense recharges. It's just there's a couple subtle differences. So when you come in here, firstly, you don't have an option of at cost or cost plus. It's just going to be percentage of revenue. So that's kind of straightforward enough, hopefully. Step two, which revenue transactions will be recharged? This is all the same. So you just choose, any revenue accounts you would like to pick up as part of the rule. You then have a separate step here where you kind of have an option to net it off against the relevant revenue account codes or post it as an expense. So this is kind of like what we just spoke about on the expense rule side with the cost plus markup. But in this case, we can choose just to use this step to do it. So either I can net off my revenue recharge to the revenue code. So instead of recording $1,000 of revenue and recharging out 500 and showing it as 500 at the end of the day, I can post that 500 as an expense, which will mean my revenue number stays at 1,000, but that's up to you. The rest of this is very similar to your expense related rules. You'll just notice that these over here are showing percentages rather than the apportionment units. So, if I want to put 50% of revenues there and 50% there, you can do that. Nice and easy to do. But it is slightly different. So I just wanted to kind of call that out in the way that you set up your revenue recharges. So that's where, yeah, if you're recording a whole bunch of revenue through one entity, but actually the nature of that revenue sometimes is related to another organization, these are the kinds of rules that you're going to want to create. Third on the list here is balance sheet rules. So these are for costs that you're storing on the balance sheet that you then want to recharge out. So maybe you don't want a certain transaction to hit the P&L and live on your P&L throughout the month to then be recharged. You just want to avoid it sitting on the P&L throughout the month. This is just one use case. So you put it to a recharged costs balance sheet code or a clearing code or a suspense code or something like that, so that like, look, it's not going to impact my P&L throughout the month. I want to push it over here into the balance sheet and then recharge it from there. You can do that. So you just go ahead and add a new rule. And obviously the main difference here is that the account codes listed out are going to be balance sheet codes. So if I have a suspense code, I can choose that there. Now, the trick here is if you are doing recharges this way, you now don't have the account code to tell you what things are. So with an expense rule, I put something to legal expenses, I know it's a legal expense. But when I've got everything going to a suspense code or a clearing code or some sort of, expenses to be recharged code, the code itself isn't giving me much. So you will probably need to go to a deeper level and add another condition. So maybe the contact who's assigned to your legal expenses is always the same, is always the same contact. So you can just choose them from the drop-down list. Appreciate Deloitte's probably not your lawyer, but they may be. So you can choose the contact there, and then that will give you the segregation or separation that you need from the other transactions to build out a rule that you need. But yeah, all in all, expenses, revenues, and balance sheet rules are all very similar in the way that they act, in the way that you can design them, in the way that you can split things across multiple entities. So if you need to use them, hopefully once you're up and running with expenses, revenue and balance sheet flow quite easily. Now, the fourth kind of rule is a Mayday rule, which is different in its nature. So where expense, revenue, and balance sheet rules look to zero first to find transactions to then recharge, Mayday rules are not based on something that's happening in zero. They are based on an amount that you're telling us about. So the standard use case for a Mayday rule is a management fee. So let's say at the end of the financial year, you and the team determine what next year's management fee is going to be. Maybe it's based on last year's revenues, based on last year's costs, whatever the case may be. You estimate forward, look, we think we need to charge out a 15,000. In my case, I'm in a GBP entity here, so a 15,000 pound amount across all of my different split across my different entities. I go to the Mayday rule section of the HQ that's charging this out. I go ahead and add a new rule and I choose the amount, 15,000 pounds. Now, for the entity charging it out, I need to record this as revenue. So I'm going to put this to my other revenue account. I can choose any tracking categories that I need as well. But that's nice and easy. This is what's going to get recorded in my London HQ. But which entities are actually going to incur the management fee expense? So that's where I get to design this down here. I can choose to have multiple entities. You can see that it's currently split 1 unit, 1 unit, 1 unit, which means it's going to be split equally, £5,000 three ways. But I can play around with this. I could say, look, out of 15, I want, out of 15 down here, I want, 3, 5, and 7. And that will then allocate equally across. Of course, if 15,000 wasn't necessarily the amount in total, it was the amount I wanted to charge everyone, then you can change this from as a total split by percentage to as the amount per apportionment unit. And so then all I have to do is set each of these units to 1. And uh, that way each of them are going to get £15,000. So you've kind of got that option. Do I split £15,000 or do I want £15,000 going per apportionment unit? But beyond that, the rest of the setup's exactly the same as before. You choose, where you'd like it to go. So maybe it's consulting fees for each of my entities. Choose any tracking category information that I need, and then I can go ahead and save this. Now, if your management fee changes every month, or maybe it's only calculated at the end of the month, that's fine as well. What you might want to do is set this up with a $0 amount, save the rule, and then when you're ready, when you know what the amount is each month, you come in here and you update that. Click save before you run your recharge calculation. And that way, next month, you can just change the amount again to whatever you need it to be. So it of course, is great and nice and easy if the management fee is the same every single month, but it's fine, absolutely fine, if it's not the same every single month. Cool. So I think that's covered off our cost plus expense rules. We've covered off the basics around revenue and balance sheet rules, but really just trying to highlight that those three kinds of rules are generally the same in the way that they operate, just slight differences. Mayday rules for your management fees. But all in all, once you've created a whole bunch of different rules in Mayday, all of them will run as part of running your recharge calculation. So just quickly on that, before we go over to the calculation and jump into some of the more, I suppose, detailed functionality in there, there is one more thing that I want to cover off within the rules section, and that is intra-entity reallocations. So this is for the scenario I mentioned earlier, where we've got something hitting one of our zero files and we want Mayday to actually reallocate it, but within that zero file. This is typically for departmental reporting. It can be for many things, though. A lot of not-for-profits use it to allocate, expenses across a bunch of different grants or bits and pieces like that. So the way that an intra-entity rule can be set up is you just choose the relevant rule type. You go add new rule. And the key thing here, so this is all the same as normal, but then the key thing down here is that the entity that you're going to choose from the list is actually the entity that this all started in. So if I'm in my London HQ and then I select London HQ from the list, you'll see that the way that this appears is slightly different. So now what we're allowing you to do is say, look, 100% of this cost is going to stay in that entity. So it's not going to leave this zero file. We're not recharging it out to another zero file. But what would I like to do within it? Well, actually, I'd like to retain the original account code. I don't need it to go to a different place. I just want to assign, some different tracking categories in here. So I can split this transaction out and I can say, look, I want a portion of it to go to Mayday London North, a portion to South, and a portion to HQ. And I want a little bit to go to engineering, a little bit to go to finance, a little bit to go to marketing. Maybe that's, where each of our teams live in those different entities, for example. Or maybe all of this is, North. Let me just enter that in. And, we want to split it across those three. So that's absolutely fine. What this is effectively saying is anytime a transaction gets posted to account 441 legal expenses, which means it would meet the criteria of this rule, we're going to pick it up when 100% of those costs, all of those costs, because we don't have any other conditions, are going to get reallocated within Mayday London HQ. 33% is going to get assigned to Mayday North London with an engineering tag. 33% is going to get assigned a London North tag and a marketing tag, and 33% will get a London North tag and a finance tag. So nice and easy to do. Of course, if I don't want those to be split equally, I can play around with these percentages however I see fit. So you've got complete control. Now, if you're building lots of these rules and you're always using the same percentages, you can set up apportionment methods for this. So you can go to apportionments. You can choose the entity in question. So for me, it was London HQ. And in here, you can see that I've already created one. But you just click add new rule. You choose the name. So maybe it's Let's just say, for departmental reporting, I know it's kind of already laid out below, but I want to, by default, retain the original account code and I want to split it across, the three that I had there, because I don't want to have to do this for every single rule. And I'd like a little bit to go to each of the departments. And then I can set over here what that is. You can see down here that I've done it based on headcount. Maybe I've got 25 engineering staff, 4 finance staff, and 12 marketing staff. Great, it'll automatically allocate those percentages out. In this case, maybe this is just a flat, nice and easy split, or just slightly more over here. Whatever the case may be, you just go ahead and click save. Now, when you go to your rules and you go to that entity and you create a rule, we'll go back. We've got our legal expenses here. And then down here, I can choose from my list of apportionments that are, within the entity first, Then you choose from your list of apportionments. Departmental reporting is the one that I just created. And you can see that it's not editable because we don't want to be able to override or ruin the integrity of that apportionment. If I need to change anything, I change it in the centralized apportionment section. Okay. So I just wanted to, number one, call out that you can use Mayday for intra-entity reallocations, but also how to do it. So how do I keep stuff within an entity, and then how to build out apportionments within that entity. So you may already know that you can create group level apportionments, which are up here, but this is for entity level apportionments. A final note on this is you can still split stuff to other entities too. So you might say legal expenses, 50% of them stay in London HQ and 50% of them go to another zero file. And that's totally fine as well. So you can come in here. And so now you can see that I've got I've got a bit of both. I've got kind of a mix of a normal recharge and an intra-entity reallocation in the same rule. Okay. So I hope that gives you some great insight into kind of the different options you've got, the management rules, the Mayday rules, your expense, revenue, and balance sheet rules, but also the intra-entity reallocation capacity. Now, once again, before we jump over to calculations, there is another kind of rule, a more detailed rule again, that is worth keeping in mind. And this is primarily used for wage recharges. So let me kind of give you a little bit of a scenario here. A lot of the businesses that use this will have this scenario. Hey, Jack, our business has 100 staff, 50 staff, 20 staff, whatever the number of staff is. Those people spend their time working on different projects, and those different projects relate to different entities in our group. And the percentage of their time that they spend across those projects changes every month. So I can't really create a rule that says, 20% of wages goes here, 30% of wages goes there, 50% of wages goes here. It's just too different every month. And at the moment, I have a really big spreadsheet that I do where basically I download payroll data from the payroll system or the job tracking system. I put it into the spreadsheet. I get insight from the project managers or the team leaders. They tell me where people have spent their time. That then takes their base salary. It calculates what portion of their base salary needs to belong against each entity. And then from there, I can manually go into each of our zero files and post the relevant entries. Now, the trouble here is that a lot of that information isn't in Zero. So no matter how well we wanted to design a rule based on wages, it's really difficult because Zero is not going to contain that information. It's in a payroll system somewhere else, or it's in or it may be in like a job management type system. There are some scenarios. I know Employment Hero is one payroll system or HR system that sometimes can post to Zero based on tracking categories, which means that all that information has been allocated out, and it's nice and easy. You just come in here and say, look, where the wages have been assigned to Australasia Holdings, then just 100% of that should be recharged to Australasia Holdings. That's great. So if the information's in Zero, you can build rules like this to grab specific wages allocated to specific tracking categories and move them out. If this isn't the case, and you do have a big spreadsheet behind your wage recharges, then I'll show you what you can do. So first things first, go to sources, choose the Zero file. I'm going to go with Mayday Australasia Holdings that pays the wages. And then you go add source and choose Google Sheets. Now I've already set this up and we have a help article that steps you through this. I'll show you where that help article is. So go to the help center in the bottom left corner, you search Google Sheets. and how to use Google Sheets for as a basis for recharges. It's all listed out in here how exactly this works. It also covers off a very common question, which is what if I'm a Microsoft user or don't have a Google account? So just check that out. It'll help explain how this works. You don't need to, use Google Sheets for your business. It's fine. It's just the way that we use it. You know, it's basically a sheet that we own, not one that you need to own. So there are a couple of steps to get access to it, but once you've got access to it, it's then connected. What this allows us to do is now build recharge rules that pull transactions from zero, but also recharge rules that pull from this Google Sheet. So it's kind of like a subledger with more information that Zero doesn't have in it. So I go to my Google Sheet, and then in here, let me just log into it, make sure I've got access. Once I'm in my Google Sheet, the first thing that you'll see is this kind of head sheet or head tab of the workbook. This is going to be the same for everyone in the way that it's laid out. You've got your description column, you've got your account code column. We're pulling the account codes from zero. You got tracking category 1, tracking category 2, and then over here you've got your different dates, so your different months of the year. Obviously, I am in a demo group, so there's a bit of demo data in here. But basically, this sheet will look the same for everyone when they first set it up. Obviously, I've entered some information, so yours wouldn't have this, but this is kind of the head tab. All the other tabs or all the other sheets in this workbook can be completely customized to your needs. So over here, you can see that I've got some wage ones. Here's my September wages, where I've got some fake names. So these are my employees. This is their base pay. This is their net earnings once we take super out. And then basically these people get allocated to a group. So, I've got a group here called, they're in the all group, they're in the general group, they're in the excluding PPMS. So this is just based on, it's not actually an actual customer's information. This is just based on a generic example. But each of our staff then get allocated to a group. Those groups up the top here, once a month, the team leads or the managers come in and basically say, what amount of time should each of those groups be allocated across each entity? So here you go, group all gets 6% there, 5% there, 13%, etc., etc. Each of the groups spend a different amount of time in different places. But once I've allocated each person to a group, now we can start calculating what of their salary or what of their earnings belongs in what entity. So from here, you can see that this person's allocated 6% to entity A, 5% to entity B. So now we've got a calculation that comes across here to effectively assign a certain portion of their wages to all of my different entities, a certain portion of their super to all of the different entities. And then at the top here, I've just got a summarized total of those. So if we're looking at this as September 24, I appreciate that's many months ago now. Let's just rename this for the sake of it today to July 2025. So what I'm going to do, entity A's wages is this cell here. So I go entity number 1 or entity A. I'm going to come across to July 2025. Where are we? July 2025. There we are. So let me just delete this data. I'm going to go ahead and say this cell equals, and you can completely change this so it's formula driven, but I want that to be 1.35 million. Wages entity 2, that's going to be in this same sheet. It's going to be the 58,000. Wages entity 3 is going to be the 276, and so on and so forth. And then the same for super. Entity number 1 is going to be here. Entity number 2 is going to be over here. And then entity number 3 is going to be over here. So I obviously haven't completed it all. And I can remove that yellow highlight as well. So now we've got July's payroll information in here. This data is simply not in Zero. What is sitting in Zero is a total wage spend of 3.78 million and a total superannuation expense of 343,000. So which is the sum of those two. So Zero doesn't give us what we need. This sheet gives us the breakdown that we need. So what can I do? How can I use this sheet and Mayday's recharge rules to actually recharge these expenses? So what you're going to do is you're going to build rules just like you would imagining this is in Zero. So I'm going to go ahead here and say I want to go to my rules. I'm going to go to the entity that houses the Google Sheet, and I'm going to go to expenses because this is these have been assigned to expense account codes. If these were revenue account codes, I'd use a revenue rule. If these were balance sheet codes, I'd use a balance sheet rule. But this account 477 is an expense. So I go add new rule and I say where the account code is 477, wages and salaries, and where the description, which is right here, wages entity one, is wages entity one. I would like all of that to be assigned to whoever entity one actually is and put into their wages and salaries account. So I can give this a name, HQ to opco wage recharge, and then click save. But the last thing, sorry, that I did forget to clarify here is you do need to swap that across from Xero to Google Sheets. So now the source is changing. So it's just saying, I would like to apply this rule to expense transactions from where? From the Google Sheet. Okay. So I can go ahead and save that rule. I just want to make sure I don't have another rule that's going to be covering the same things, and I may well do. So I do. So let me just actually remove the one that I created so I can actually show you how this works. I'll just archive. I'll just archive that one because I want to keep the one that I just created for you. Cool. So we've got this rule. It's going to pick up anything with account 477, and it's going to pick up anything where the description is wages entity one, which is this row here, which is this $1.353 million amount. I can then duplicate that rule once I've got it created, which I have, and swap out the relevant accounts and swap out and then create the superannuation versions of this as well. So it's just a one-time thing to duplicate the rules and set them up, and then they'll be updated moving forward. So that's how you set up the sheet. That's how you can add other tabs and add your own custom calculations. All we need is to get that data into a format that we can then read and recharge, which is this head tab of the sheet. So now let's say we've gone through our process with all the different rules. We've got some revenue rules that we want to recharge. We've got some balance sheet rules. We've got some Mayday rules for management fees. We've got an intra-entity reallocation. It's now come time to finally run our recharge. So I go to my calculation section. I haven't actually finished June yet. So usually you want to finish your last month, but I'm going to start with July. And I click on my new button and I click on July. Now, at this point, I will call out that we do have support for custom periods as well. So when I click July and I click create, what's going to happen? Mayday is going to go over all of our Xero files as well as our Google Sheet and look for all the transactions dated between the 1st and the 31st of July to pick up those transactions for recharging. If you're a business that recharges more frequently than that, I know we have some hospitality businesses that do it weekly. We have some other businesses that have less recharge need or fewer recharge needs and might do this quarterly even. Most do it monthly, but there are scenarios where you want to do it more or less frequently. So you've got custom here as an option where you could say, I just want to run it, for the first fortnight, and you can go ahead and click create. The important thing to note here is you can't run two recharges over the same period of time. So once you've run a recharge from the 1st to the 14th, you can't then run a monthly recharge for July, and you can't then run a recharge from the 8th to the 22nd because the 8th to the 14th have already been captured. So if you were to do it on a more frequent basis, you just have to know if I do it from the 1st to the 14th, that is then done, and I move on from the 15th to the next date that I want to recharge. So that's the important thing to know around custom recharge periods. The key trick with those, if they are relevant to you, is that most finance teams are closing the books at the end of a month and locking them down and making sure, late transactions are minimized. If you're doing it more frequently, like weekly or fortnightly, there's much more opportunity for things if you're not locking things down every week you've run your recharges for the week and then a whole bunch of late transactions come in, and that then means you got to update your recharges. But we can do that and I'll show you how to. But yes, monthly is standard, so I'll just go ahead, click July, and click create. So now we're running the calculation, and there's a bunch of stuff that will happen here. So one is we're going to run first. I don't have a ton of transactions in Xero for the month of July, but we've got our entity, one of our entities, Mayday Australasia Holdings here, and these are the expense rules that have run. So the first thing I want to show you is that we've got our OpCo wage recharge. So this here is recharging 1.436, which is, let me just double check that I need to sync my sources. So because I just updated my Google Sheet, that number that was in the sheet has now changed to 1.353. So I want to make sure that that's getting picked up correctly. So if you do change this number, you do need to sync it, just like if you posted something to Xero and then you wanted to pick it up in here. So I'll just give it a second to run that through, and then we'll come back to that. Now, here's an example of an intra-entity subscription rule. So basically, this one here is going to actually stay within the entity. So it appears very similar to normal. Nothing major has changed. You've got a couple of normal recharges that are going to go out to different entities. So you can see those there as well. And then down here, we've got one of our Mayday rules, which is our Australasia Holdings consultation fee, which is going to recharge or charge, sorry, not recharge, charge $1,000 out from this entity, which is Holdings, Australasia Holdings. It's going to recharge that out to my Mayday Australasia Opco entity. Okay. So we can see all of those transactions. I'm just waiting for that sync to finish so that it can pick up that final bit from the Google Sheet, which shouldn't take too long. And then we can go from there. But basically what I want to see in here is my transaction updated. So let me go recalculate. Wages entity one is now shown correctly as 1.353 million, which I can see over there. So if you're ever unsure, if you're ever thinking something doesn't match to zero, it happens to the best of us. It happened to me just then. I forgot to hit sync, and so my numbers were out of date. So don't stress. If something doesn't align to zero or align to your Google Sheet, just remember to make sure that you've synced everything. Something else, just as a small call out while we're here, um, a lot of the questions I get from users to say, "Oh, hey Jack, why isn't this getting recharged?" Or what's happened with this? I find that it's quite useful that you can flick this across to account code and you can see each of your P&L codes in detail, and you can jump into those and you can say, that's the transaction I was looking for. Here it is. I can see that Mayday has in fact got that transaction. So then it allows you to say, okay, cool. Mayday hasn't missed the transaction. The transaction is in zero, but I can see that it's not getting recharged. Maybe there's something about the description that doesn't match the recharge rule, or maybe it's something else that you might need to look into. But either way, we've now got our recharges sorted. We're happy. We've got our Google Sheet recharge as well. Let's move through our process. So I get through my screen here and I get to my postings. And there's a couple of things that I want to call out. One is all your other recharges, if you've run any other recharges or you're familiar with just general expenses. Quite simple. You just work your way down the list here on the left-hand side. These are all your different inter-entity pairings. You can choose to post them as invoices and bills, or as journals, as draft, or as posted. You can choose the currency that you want to use, the exchange rate you want to use as well, if you are posting across currencies. And you can choose to group the transaction descriptions or the invoice and bill descriptions or the journal descriptions based on the name of the rule or based on the specific transactions themselves. But you work your way through this list. Something that I wanted to highlight on this page was down here, we've got kind of like a one-sided option. All these others have from and to. This one, though, just says in. And that's because this is an intra-entity reallocation where this is only going to be postable as a journal because it's within the same zero file. So this is, that example earlier, we had some expenses. I was using legal expenses as the example, but in this use case, it's talking about subscriptions and travel, where basically we've set up a rule that says I want to reallocate this from here to here. Now the travel example is probably a poor one because it doesn't look like it's doing anything different. It's just debiting it and crediting it because the rule must just say just do that. But subscriptions is a good example where basically we're saying everything that goes to subscriptions I would like to be assigned to the marketing department. So let's credit the standard subscriptions cost and then let's debit subscriptions again, but with the marketing department allocated. And then I can go ahead and post that to zero. And that will then post that in as a journal just for that zero file. Nice and easy. So this part of the process we do cover in the basics training, so I won't cover in too much more detail, just kind of the postings, the standard posting process. But of course, if you do have any questions, throw them in the chat. You've also got help articles and guides that step you through. There's a bunch of videos on all of this stuff that you can watch on demand. Now, there are a couple of things on the kind of advanced or masterclass that I want to talk about though. One of them is what we call second order recharges. And that is, if I kind of go back here, you may have noticed it. This next step says recharge transactions. And then it takes me to this screen before I then eventually get to my postings. So what is that second screen? And I'm going to jump back to June to show you that. So if I go to my June section here, what that next step recharge transactions is, and just so you're aware, this section will only appear if it's relevant. It will not even appear for you if it's not relevant. We will just take you straight through to postings. But if it is relevant, like it is for June, basically what this is the first screen is showing you every transaction that Mayday has picked up when it runs your recharges. So it's saying, look, I can see a whole bunch of recharge rules that you've designed. When I look at the month of June, in this case, I can see a whole bunch of June transactions that meet the criteria of your rules. So here they are for your review on screen. So you can see everything on screen. You can double check it. You can make sure that you're happy. If you weren't aware, you can make changes in here. So you could select transactions and change transactions. You can create ad hoc recharge rules just for this month if you have a specific need. But really, this whole screen is a review screen so that you can make sure that you're happy everything's running as planned. Now, if you had a rule that said, I want to recharge, let me just see if I can quickly figure out. I've got one here, London shared office revenue. So we're saying, anything that goes to Mayday London HQ into their sales account. Okay, so let me go back. So let's say anything that goes into my Mayday London HQ into their sales account should get recharged out to another entity. Okay. When we run our recharge for June, if there's nothing in my sales account, then that rule won't run. There's nothing for us to recharge. However, if another entity in our group, let's say one of my Australian entities, says anything that goes to my sales account should be moved to London HQ sales account, now all of a sudden we have this strange kind of, well, it's going to go from Australia to London out. So we've got kind of two steps here. And at the first stage, there's nothing in the London sales account. So correctly, there's nothing being picked up here. But somewhere down here, somewhere down in our rules, we must have a rule that is allocating sales to London HQ. So this page is the first order. What's happening in zero? What recharges should run? Then, if something happening on this screen triggers another recharge rule to run, then that's why we show you this screen here. So there's always going to be less in here, but it's worth understanding that this can be done if you do have this kind of A to B to C scenario. It is worth noting, it doesn't go further than that. We don't go to D to E to F. It is first order and second order recharges only. But once we've got our first order in, we can then see what's going to happen. One thing to note is this icon will not be of zero, it will be of Mayday. And that is because this transaction does not exist in zero yet. It will exist in zero once we've posted our recharges, and then from there we want to recharge it out again. So it's worth understanding that you can do these second order recharges if you have complex scenarios. And it's worth me showing you kind of that this is the screen where they will appear. But all in all, it all ends up getting wrapped up together in this ultimate posting screen here. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that that was covered off as well. Now, just to kind of reiterate everything that we've been over from top to bottom. So we've covered our different recharge rule types. We've covered expense rules, revenue rules, balance sheet rules, and Mayday rules. Mayday rules for management fees. We've covered a little bit more depth in there around the cost plus rules within expenses if you'd like to post to revenue accounts rather than to an expense code. We've spoken about intra-entity reallocations and how you can build rules to keep things in a zero file, but just allocate it to a different place. We've spoken about some of your more complex recharges, which may require the Google Sheet integration. And as a reminder, you don't need to be a Google user. It's okay. You can be a Microsoft user and still use this. There's a great help article that steps you through it. That's for your more complex recharges. Then in terms of actually running the calculations, we've covered off how to run them on a monthly basis or on a custom period basis. We've covered off on how you can see your Google Sheet recharges in here. We've covered off on second order recharges that may pop up from time to time. And we've covered off on in the posting screen what it looks like to have an intra-entity reallocation to post as a journal compared to or how that's different to your normal recharges. The last thing I want to cover off today, and I know there's a lot in this session, so we will record it, we will upload it to the Help Center as well. The last thing I want to cover off on is updating recharges or kind of finishing them off. And then, how do I add in new transactions? So when I go into my month of June, if I've run my recharges, I'm happy with them and I post them all to zero, what happens if tomorrow there's a new transaction that I realize I missed? Well, I want to describe the process before and after you hit the mark as final button. The idea of the mark as final button is you work your way through all of your postings. So you post all of these to zero until they're all green ticks and you're happy. You talk to the team, you say, are we all done? We're all done. And you say, cool, then I'm going to mark it as final. As it says there, marking as final will freeze the calculation so that it can no longer be edited, as in the recharge rules can never be changed again, and the apportionment methods you've used can never be changed again. We store them in time for that month. This allows you, if in September you needed to come back to June to pull in a late transaction, you can open up the calculation. We've kept all the rules and apportionments that you used as at that date. So it is a really important button to push, but it is an important sliding doors or line in the sand moment once you pushed it, because the way that you update recharges before you push that and after you push that is different. So let me talk you through. Before we click mark as final, you can basically change anything. Let's draw the next line is, have I posted to zero? If you haven't posted any of these to zero, so I have posted these to zero, but this one here, I haven't. So let's say I've run my recharges and I haven't posted anything to zero. At that point, you can create new rules, you can change apportionment methods, you can add apportionment methods, you can delete your calculation, rerun your calculation, do whatever you need to do, and just click the recalculate button to see what the changes are going to be. So nice and easy. You haven't posted anything to zero yet. Do anything that you like, change anything that you need. Super easy. Just click the recalculate button and it will all update nice and quickly. Once you have posted to zero, you can still do all of those things, but obviously now we have a posting that's gone to zero that we might need to update. So in this case, you see an edit button. So it says this calculation has been updated since these were posted. So you can click on edit. You can then either recreate it. In this case, it's going as an invoice and bill. So we can recreate it if for some reason you need. The original will still be there. So just be careful if you're recreating. You'd want to then void what you did post in zero. Or you can simply update the posting that we've done. Super easy to do. Click update. The invoice and bill that are already in zero will simply be updated. Or if you posted it as a journal, the journal will be updated. The only little trick to this is if you've posted it as an invoice and bill and you've already allocated a payment against that, i.e. you've reconciled against cash that's hit the bank account, Xero will not let us update the invoice and bill because it has a payment assigned to it. So you would first have to remove the payment and then we can update it and then you can reassign the payment and there'll be a gap for the difference. So that's how you do it once you've posted to zero, but you haven't locked your, or you haven't marked it as final. So up until this point, you can still make any changes that you want. You can still bring in late transactions. You just have to be a little bit more wary. You need to update your postings in Xero, which you can easily do. But once you've marked a payment against them, then you just need to remember you have to remove the payment before you update. Now, once you have marked it as final, then things change again. So at this point, let's go to one of my other calculations that has been marked as final. Go into the postings here for May. At this point, I can't change my recharge rules for May. I can't change my apportionments for May. The only way I could possibly do that is void everything that I've posted, go to my calculation and say delete calculation, and then actually run it again from scratch. Now, you probably don't want to do that. So we're now in here. Your recharge rules are fixed, your apportionments are fixed, which is generally what everybody wants because they want to maintain the integrity of the rules that were run at that point in time, which is great. So it's quite powerful in the way that it works and supports that. But what does happen from time to time is a late transaction will get posted. So let's say a late transaction got posted and I want to open up this calculation and bring that late transaction in. What you can do is reopen the calculation, which is fine. Reopening it won't apply new rules or new apportionments. It will simply bring in new transactions. It won't do anything else. Once you've got your new transactions in, you can then come through to the posting screen like we did before and update your postings to zero, just like I showed. So nice and easy, no issues at all. That's fine. The only other thing to note is that with Marker's final, because we've kind of laid that down, we've drawn that line in the sand and said, we're done, effectively, we're done with this month. Mayday also notifies you. So we have a notification section here. And in that notification section, we will tell you, hey, there are some new transactions for May 2025 requiring a recalculation and reposting. Now, if you don't care, you can just tick it off and say, done, I don't need to, I'm moving on. We'll post those manually. But if you want to, then you can click on View May 2025's calculation. It'll say up here, some things have changed. You can reopen it. You click reopen. You go through the process. Review it again. So you just double checking, what's changed. You can click on new only. Look, I don't know, this is demo data, but it'll show you, what's new. So you can kind of scroll through and see the yellow transactions are all new since this was posted. So it makes it nice and easy to spot. Double check that you're happy with all that. Move through the process. Move through the process to the posting screen. And then in here, update any of the journals or postings that you need. Edit, update, and we will simply update. And then you can remark it as final once you're done. So it is an easy process. It is absolutely possible to update your postings if you need to, but it's important to understand those kind of 3 levels. Before you've posted to 0, do whatever you want, change as much as you need, nice and easy. Once you've posted to 0, pretty much the same. It's only a little bit of a difference when you've marked payments or assigned payments against invoices and bills. And then the third stage is once you've marked it as final, that does lock down the rules and apportionments. Those aren't changing anymore, but we can still bring in late transaction. So all in all, that has been hopefully a useful kind of session covering the ins and outs of some of Recharge's more advanced functionality. As a bit of a reminder, this was the agenda that we set out to cover. So recharging from revenue and balance sheet codes, nice and easy to do. How to create management fees, nice and easy to do with Mayday rules. You've got intra-entity reallocations that we covered as well. We did the recharging complex costs like wages via the Google Sheet approach. And then also we covered updating recharges after posting. And ultimately what we want is that calculation screen to be green ticks across the board, green ticks to say you've run it, you've reviewed it, and you've marked it as final. And that's kind of the workflow that you should aim to complete as part of the recharge process. So yeah, I'm complete from my side. So if anyone has any questions, please throw them through to the Q&A. I haven't seen anything come through yet, which is great. Hopefully a great sign. Of course, if you do have questions beyond today, the Help Center is a fantastic resource. There are tons of guides and articles and videos for Recharger. So if you want step-by-step instructions, if you want to see a video of how exact things work, jump over to the Help Center and dive in there. So yeah, I think that is all. I haven't seen any questions come through. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks again for being a supporter of Mayday. And please feel free to come back if you ever want to check out this training session again. All right, I will leave you to it. Have a great day. Thank you.